Madam Clerk? Sam, you ready, sir?
Yes,
All right.
we're ready.
Good evening, or good afternoon. I call the March 18th, 2024 City Council meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Oshrin? Here. Councilor Payne?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston?
Here.
Councilor Snook?
Here.
Mayor Wade?
Here. Is there a motion, do we, no, we're not there. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
I would suggest adding to the agenda discussion of a ceasefire resolution.
Is there a second to amend the?
Second.
Okay. So the motion is now that to approve the agenda with the addition of adding discussion for the ceasefire resolution. We have a second for that. Can we please cast our vote? Okay. So it's before we move into that, just kind of this the location of that on the agenda. I think we're expecting a large crowd at 6:30 for that. What's any suggestion on where we could place that?
My initial thought was just the end of the agenda, just because I think that's usually what we do with something's added.
Okay.
I had the same thought.
Okay.
I guess the question would be whether we want to make it as a public hearing matter and then basically suggest that everybody addresses on the merits at that point, or whether you want to go ahead and just keep it as they would have the right to speak at the beginning of the community matters, and again at the end after we've already done what we're going to do.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's going to be whether, people will have to stay around. Not that they wouldn't want to, but I think a lot of people would tend to leave once this item is done. But
It's going to be the last item on the agenda in either event. The question is, will they get to speak before we vote?
right. So if we do that, I'm not sure. Can we tell them that, if you've already signed up, you're one of the first 8 and on the waiting list?
I guess my view is, not to overly complicate this, but I feel like we've heard lots of commentary and we're going to get lots of feedback from people and folks will have had a chance to speak at community matters. I think by that point we will have had enough information for us to decide one way or the other how each one of us feels. So for me, I would prefer to just go ahead and have it as the last item on the agenda, and then if people have further commentary afterwards, so be it. That would be my view, because it would just keep things simpler.
Right. So are you saying that if they have any comments on the first part of community matters, that they not speak then but wait to the end?
No, I'm saying let them go ahead and speak
yeah.
as they had planned to.
Right. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
not change any of that. And then if people want to hang around
Yeah.
after we discuss it at the very end, they can continue to lobby
Yeah.
for another option.
So what and Jay, you can let us know if we can do this. If we have it as the last item, then we will discuss it, and then there will be the last item for public matters, and people can speak, on any matter.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. So council has added it to their agenda. It would normally be added as a last action item, but the clarification from the council suggests that matter be moved as item 17 following the second community matters opportunity for people to speak. That would allow both for those who have signed up and indicated that they wish to speak to the issue, as well as those who were number 17 on, to still have an opportunity to speak to the issue before council considers it, and that would be the last item that council would act on prior to adjournment.
So we will hear them, the last, and then we will have discussion on it, and then, yes.
If I could, there's not a section on the agenda for an action after community matters. There's just adjournment after community matters. There's not a separate section for hearing agenda items.
Yeah, that's why I suggested 16 and then 17 as the item, and then people we would have made a decision, then people could still talk after that, but it would be after we had made a decision.
Okay. So.
I think it's going to be a late night. So.
Yeah, regardless. So 17, we will discuss it, and then there will be other business, and then the community matters at that point, and they will know whether, if we support it or what have you. Does it make sense?
Yes.
It's fine.
Okay. Thank you. So, so we've amended the agenda. Okay, this meeting will be divided into three main.
Sir, do we need an actual vote on the amended agenda?
I thought we just
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
we did.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, and this meeting will be divided into three main sections. The first one is this part, a work session to hear and discuss presentation that do not require a council vote, followed by a closed meeting, and I don't think today we have a closed.
No, sir, Mr. Mayor.
So, and then council will come back at 6:30 for our regular business meeting. We'll now have reports, city grants inventory, Ms. Taylor Harvey Ryan.
And then I'm not texting, I'm just turning down the mic for my hearing aids. So, hold on. All right, awesome, thank you. All right. Hello, Mayor Wade, City Councilor, City Manager Sanders. Thank you for the opportunity to present the grants inventory report on behalf of the Office of Community Solutions. My name is Taylor Harvey Ryan, and I serve as the Grants Program Manager. And then do I just say like next slide?
There's a clicker. It may be on this side. It's over here.
Oh, did I stand on the wrong side?
It doesn't, yeah, you're fine.
Awesome. Right. So my role within OCS is to provide oversight for our grants management program and then also federal entitlement administration, which you guys know is our CDBG and our home program. All right, so this is a wonderful organization chart of our Office of Community Solutions. So my team is right there in the middle. Underneath Alex, who is our director, is me as the grants program manager. And then I have two grants analysts underneath me, which are Anthony Warren, who does our CDBG and our home program. And then we also have Alan Pure, who is our general grants analyst, who supports all of our grants. So that tiny but mighty team is responsible for all the things that you see here on your screen, which is to develop and maintain our standard operating procedures for grants management and administration, develop and implement monitoring and reporting procedures for all of our grants, provide technical assistance to city departments and our community partners regarding grants, evaluate and secure grant opportunities that align with city council priorities, and then also administer our HUD programs, also known as CDBG and HOME. All right. So why we're here today is this grants inventory report. So in order to do all those things that I mentioned in the last slide, we had to do a grants inventory report, which is essentially take a baseline inventory of what all our city manages. So prior to me starting here, there was not a central database or a single methodology for how we manage grants. Each of the departments and offices applied for grants and managed them to the best of their abilities in a number of different ways, which means that some folks would say, oh, okay, this grant looks good, I'm going to apply for it. Other folks had like a more formalized process. But that just means we were not consistent across all of our different departments, which then also means no one person or one department could tell you all the grants that were being managed by the city, which is a big thing when you're talking about grant compliance and those kinds of things. And then also being good stewards of the funds when our community partners are saying, hey, we'd like to apply with you on this grant. We don't know what another department is doing or what they're not doing. So it's very important that we have this grants inventory. So essentially, in order to have a better understanding for the work that was being done, we had to conduct this grants inventory report, which ultimately provides an overview of all of the grants that are being managed across all of our city departments, and then provides the pertinent information. Right now, it includes who the funder is, so who we're getting the money from, the award allocation, so the amount of money that we're getting from them, and also how much we have to match for those funds, if we do or if we don't. It also tells you if that grant is renewable or recurring, so whether or not it's something that it automatically renews, we get it every year, or is something we have to apply for every year, or is it a one-time grant? So that is included in our inventory. It also tells you the period of performance, so how long we have to spend the money and do the actual project associated with that money, and do our final reports and things of that nature. And then it also gives you a summary of what that project is, so what are those funds supposed to be used for. So all of that is included in the grants inventory report, which was attached with the agenda item. This report is a living, breathing document, so it is updated regularly. However, we will publish it in its entirety twice a year, which would be in January, which is the one that you have with you, and then we'll also do it again in July. But at any time, if any changes are being made to these grants, we are updating it on a live basis. So if we know a grant has been closed, we update it on our report, and we maintain that internally, but we'll produce it externally twice a year.
So,
Go back.
no, do you want the questions to wait to the end?
You can ask me whenever you're ready.
I'm curious of the software you use to.
Okay, perfect. So right now, we do not have software, which I will talk about momentarily. So right now, your software is me and an Excel spreadsheet,
Okay.
and then our grants analyst as well. However, we will get into the software
Okay.
just a smidge. So if you were to ask for this report right now, you have it in a PDF format, but when we're talking about tracking it, making live updates, that is in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. So in this report that you have in front of you right now, currently the city manages 95 grants, and our total allocation for those grants is $193,689,277. I will go ahead and make that note, and you can see in the very tiny print there, that is the full balance of our grant award, so that does not take into account that these projects are ongoing, so money is currently being spent, so we don't currently have $193 million just sitting on the books, as most of these projects are currently spending money. So this is a graph, a breakdown of all of the grants that we're currently managing. It does not include every single department, as transit and social services are not included in this iteration, but likely to be included in future iterations. But as you can see, we have 95 grants total. It breaks it down across the different departments and offices, with Public Works having the most right now at 25 grants, and that's approximately $151 million.
Sorry, you said transit and
Social services
are not part of this?
currently.
Do you have a just ballpark estimate of what that amount might be? If not, that's
Okay,
totally fine.
I can get it to you, but I
Okay.
don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
perfect. Okay, so as we were doing this grants inventory report, which was essentially surveys of our different departments, interviews with the different departments to figure out what grants that they're managing, and then also meeting with our funders as well to make sure what we thought we had and what they thought we had were in alignment. We made several notable discoveries, which I'll kind of go into like an overview. So one thing that was noticed is that there's a significant misunderstanding of grants, which is not uncommon. Grants is a specialty, so that's why you have folks who do grant writing, grants analysts, grants managers, and things of that nature, so that folks can have a better understanding of the language that our funders are using, because oftentimes it is a lot of acronyms, a lot of jargon, and if you don't understand what those regulations mean, you might not be using the funds to the best of your ability or getting the maximum impact out of those funds. So there was some misunderstanding as to what grants can be used for. A lot of people think of it as like free money, but it's not free money. You have to do a project, turn in your goals and objectives, all those kinds of things. So certain folks don't realize like there's a return that has to come back with those grant funds that you're getting. But then also some other smaller things like how and when to request an extension on your grant, and you can't just keep your grant funds for forever and ever and ever until you finish the project. There typically is a close date on those. How to close out your grants. Folks think my project is complete, my grant is closed. That is not how that works. You oftentimes have to turn in a report at the very end of those things, and there's often a whole list of things you have to do to actually close out your grant, and that comes with a retention policy on the documents and all that kind of stuff. So if you don't close out your grant, you're forever having to hold those documents for forever and ever, when in reality most grants, on average, you only have to keep your documents 5 to 7 years and then you can shred them. But if you don't close it out, you hold those documents for forever. And then also how to do a change in scope. So if for some reason your project needs to deviate from what you originally asked for, you have to ask permission to change your scope and to change the use of your funds. Folks don't often know that, and so that does create some confusion between program staff, project staff, and then our funders as well. Also notice a lack of continuity on our grant working departments. Just like everywhere else, we're having staff turnover. So if one staff is working on a project, they leave, and someone else is not aware of that project or that grant, it just is just sitting there and no work is happening and things of that nature. Or what was more likely happening is someone applied for funds, then they left, and then there was no one to say, oh, we got this award, now we need to start this project. So now with this, we have a master list of the grants, master list of who's working on those grants. I'm in contact with the funders. So if someone does change, we are updating that on a regular basis. The lack of continuity with the grants also, there were significant delays in reporting, reimbursements, and project completion, which just happens with staff leaving or things of that nature and one person not knowing what another staff person was doing. There was also lack of formal collaboration between our departments. There was informal communication and informal collaboration, but oftentimes you need a more formal process when you're working on a grant to say your department is going to do this, our department is going to do this, and so at the end we have this one project. But sometimes we don't really have that formal collaboration, which does work in opposition of us when we're applying for grant funds. Also, when folks don't know what one department is doing, then we have folks going for the same grant funds and competing against ourselves, which is double work and less reward. So now we have a process where, since we have this inventory, folks come through our office to say we're going to apply for these funds. I can say, oh, hey, for example, social services is working on this grant. These are both in alignment with your mission and vision. You two can work together. This is how that would look. And now we have a stronger application versus two smaller applications competing against one another for the same funds. We also noticed that there was a difficulty tracking grants. You don't have all your grants in one place. Obviously, that's hard to track across the different departments. Also, match commitments were harder to track because folks were saying, oh, this department could match, when in reality those funds may be committed elsewhere. We also had letters of support and MOUs coming from every different direction. Now we have one place that folks can come to for letters of support or MOU agreements, and then we can manage them all in one place. And then lastly, just a lack of transparency on the grants between our departments and our community partners. Folks didn't know what we were applying for versus what community partners were applying for, what our roles were. And so that was just one thing that we noticed and something that we're addressing.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So this is great to hear that this is all getting kind of like cleaned up and organized. I'm a big fan of Excel spreadsheets, so it's good to hear that this is all kind of info collected in one place. How long has this process of kind of tidying all this up been?
So I've been here since last year, January 31st, and so I was brought in and given this as my first thing to kind of figure out, build processes and things of that nature, and immediately was like, hey, how do you guys keep a track of your grants? Everyone was doing it differently, so it's been about a year.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. So obviously, while we had those notable discoveries, we have had some accomplishments towards those noticeable discoveries. So first, we've completed this grants inventory report, which is why we're here, and we are on track to release a second iteration of that report this July. We've also created processes for our grants management and administration. So we've streamlined our application process. So now folks aren't looking for grants all over the place. We have a central place where you can come and say, hey, this is the project I'm looking for, this is the funding source, do these match and align, and can we go for them, will we be competitive? We had folks who would see a grant opportunity, get really excited, and then not realize that we weren't eligible because it says only nonprofits when we are local government, those kinds of things. We've also streamlined requests for letters of support, so that way every department head is not being messaged by a nonprofit for the same letter. It all comes through our office. And then we've also encouraged collaboration among our departments and community partners so that we can have stronger applications and less competition between all of us. Okay. And while we've done all those wonderful things, there are still some areas of opportunity that we're looking into and looking to get resolved. So we are going to expand that grants inventory report. This was the inaugural release, so obviously since creating this, we found we can expand this. We can include those missing departments. We are also going to include the status of projects, so that way folks know where we are at in the process. Are we at that closeout point? Are we waiting for permits, those kinds of things. And then also we are going to make the grants inventory report accessible to folks, so whether that be on the internet or on the city website, those kinds of things. Because folks do want this information and regularly reach out for it, so it'll just be easier if folks can just have access to it. And then to Mayor Wade's point, where are we keeping this information? We are in the process of procuring grants management software, because while an Excel spreadsheet is wonderful, we have 95 grants and it's continuing to grow. So an Excel spreadsheet is not the best warehouse for this information. And that means it's only housed on an Excel spreadsheet, so should hopefully nothing happen to it, that's the only place that it's stored. We're also working on streamlining our finance process for tracking reimbursements, so making sure that all the money that we have been awarded actually does come back to us. Since most of these things are reimbursable, we want to ensure that we're balancing our budget for each of these grants. We're also continuously doing needs assessment. There are obviously new needs coming up around the community at all times, so we want to make sure that we're aware of those and securing grants for those needs. And then another big opportunity is monitoring and compliance. Many of our programs have not been monitored, and so we are going to start doing that and ensuring that we are in compliance with our funders, but also making sure we're just good stewards of the funds. So we are going to be in the near future releasing a monitoring and compliance tool.
And just quickly, a quick follow-up to that. So, and I know that Excel can do amazing things. So I'm trying to figure out how it's, is there ways you can put like, project number 26 and the long line of, can you put on there that to give yourself a tickler or something that an update or something is due,
Yes.
to the fund? Is you can do those
Yeah.
type of things.
So in my Excel spreadsheet, it does have little notes of reminders, but it does not send me like an alert. So I have my calendar matched with it, which is great and all the things. But this
Okay.
grants management software will allow us to
Yeah.
have alerts and things like, hey, your reports are due on this day. And across 95 different grants across various different departments, those alerts will be very key.
It sounds like you already have a software in mind.
Am I? Yes? Okay. Yeah. We're in the procurement process, so I was like, I'm not permitted.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So do you guys have any additional questions?
I'll start with you. Lloyd, do you have
I have
any
no
questions?
No,
Just that I'm glad you're doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that. And what Councilor Oshrin said a minute ago, this is really, really important, and I appreciate you doing it. It's, tidying up and making sure we're being good stewards, like you mentioned, and taking full advantage of every nickel we're given to advance the good of the organization and good of the community. And it is remarkable, the number of grants and the total dollar value. And it sounds like you're still working on the transit piece.
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's kind of a different beast, I suppose. But yeah, thank you for this. I appreciate the presentation.
Yes, thank you for the invite.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just echo what others have said. I think even though it may not be work that the public necessarily sees all the time, I think this is some of the most important work that is happening in the city. I just have two questions. One is something we've discussed a little bit in the past, is how to most strategically and proactively go after the money available in the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. So is that kind of an internal initiative that exists that's through your office, or?
Yeah, so we are currently and continuously evaluating the grant opportunities that are available through that and matching it with the projects that we have. So we do meet with the various different departments. And if they see an opportunity and they want us to evaluate it to make sure, number one, we're competitive, is what we're attempting to do in alignment with what is allowable, which is typically where we have the more gray area and need additional technical assistance. But yeah, so we are always looking to see what money is out there and how does it match with our council priorities.
And the second question, kind of connected, is something else we've discussed a little bit, is something a lot of localities have. It's kind of a government affairs official who is interfacing both with state government and federal government, connecting in terms of identifying funding opportunities that may come through specific state or federal agencies. My understanding is that doesn't currently exist in the city, but is that something that would come through your office if it were to exist?
I will leave that to City Manager.
You're reading my mind as to where I would like to be able to go with this particular role, but we're trying to bite off what we can handle right now. But I would say that would be an interest of mine as well.
Definitely.
I was going to say, because currently right now, with the current funders that we do have, I do serve as a liaison, so when additional funding opportunities open up in those different agencies, they do alert me. I am on the various different listservs, so I do match the funding that they have with the current priorities and projects that we have, but it would be nice to have someone who can do that on a fuller scale.
Definitely. That's all I have, and again, the presentation information and the agenda was very informative, so thank you.
I just have a small kind of logistics question. If someone in a department wants to go for a grant, do they first, what's the process? Do they check in with you all to see, and then
Yes.
just, can you kind of give a narrative?
Yes,
on how
I
that
can.
goes?
So prior to me coming here, folks would see a grant and they would just go for it, is kind of how I understand it prior to me. Now we have a standard operating procedure, so if someone sees a grant that they are interested in, there's like a little form that they fill out, it comes to me, I walk through the grant, then we meet together and say, hey, this is the project, walk me through it, because I'm not an expert in all the various different things, like I couldn't tell you, all the things about sustainability, but I meet with them, walk through their grant, match it, and then we go ahead and set up kind of like a review, and then make sure it's in alignment with council priorities, get city manager approval, and then we go ahead and write that application. And then that way we can track it, and I can say, all right, this part is a finance piece, this part is like a grants management piece, and then this is the technical part that your program would need to write, and then we make sure it's competitive and then submit it that way.
Great, and so for everyone in the city, that's what they're
Yes.
gonna do? Okay, excellent. Great, and is there, are you keeping track of like success rates? Okay, and are they improving, or
So
we don't have enough data yet?
I would say we don't have enough data. I would say that they are improving from what I'm understanding, but since I've only been here 1 year and they weren't tracking this beforehand, I can only speak to the grants that we've applied for since then, which is about a 92% success rate.
Excellent.
But also being very mindful that a lot of our grant applications are still waiting to be reviewed and approved as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
So I think my last question, I'm not sure if it's for Sam, but or Ashley. We go to these conferences and we get these great, ideas, or to apply for different grants or programs and things. So do we bring it to you or let you know about it, Sam? Okay.
Everything goes to Taylor.
Okay. Don't have anything, but Cena was really good about going to conferences and bringing some good ideas and trying to pick up the ball from her. But anyway, so if you see a wave of emails once we they must have been at a conference.
That's totally fine. My email information was listed on that last slide of the presentation. Feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah.
So if I could, I would just add that I was trying not to smile too much because this is a great plan coming together.
Yes.
I'll claim it was mine, but just okay. When I got here, Ashley and I specifically haven't been in the nonprofit world for a while and know what grants are like and the process and the work that comes with it. As we asked questions, we didn't get good answers. So Taylor being here is the result of saying we got to do better than that, and this is a good way to demonstrate that we have done better by being able to have this central repository. And one of the things that was also lacking was what you just described. That moment where you go to a conference, I go to a conference, there's something that seems intriguing to us, and who's going to apply for that? But we never really had anybody, and it would be a matter of trying to fit that in with whatever we have going on. A lot of things in that sense didn't get applied for, and now I basically told Taylor, be ready. You might get these. She's gotten a couple that we've already applied for. But the goal is just to be able to look at where these other opportunities, they may be smaller, but still opportunities that the city can bring other money to the table to match to some of the things that we're already doing.
And it's okay to say, it's not a good match for us, but thank you for bringing
And
us.
she will. She will say that.
Good.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor.
Okay, James, all right.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor Wade, members of council. James Fries, Director of Neighborhood Development Services. So you all received a memo from me in your packets talking about looking ahead towards NDS's work plan for at least the next year, if not further than that. As you know, as we've been working on this EVO Plans Together process, Affordable Housing Plan, Comprehensive Plan, and then zoning ordinance, there's a number of projects that were kind of floating out there that we've had to put on hold. And even over the course of that process, there were a number of things that we identified as things that we might want to do, issues we might want to address, that we had to set aside for the time being while we focused on that effort. So that's done. So now we get to look ahead and start picking up all these different projects that we've had kind of hanging out there on the docket. So the memo that I provided to you has 8 different projects listed on it. That's not to say that there aren't more out there, and I'm more than happy to identify additional things for us to be considering work on. But at least those were the ones that I was able to identify in advance. I wanted to talk about these just overall for a minute before diving into any of the individual projects listed. First, I wanted to acknowledge straight up that each of these projects represents a process of investigation, dialogue, and decision-making, right? We're not going into these with preconceived notions of what we're coming out with. None of these are, we're doing this project in order to do this. We're doing this project in order to solve a problem. And to that end, each of these processes kind of goes through a 3-step process of first understanding that problem or issue. What is the issue, and getting to understand it in a greater depth. And first part of that is gathering data. What data do we have on that particular issue? What are the trend lines on that issue? And when I talk about data, I'm really talking about it from the broadest sense. Some of the most important data we collect is what is the public sentiment around this issue? What do the key stakeholders feel about this issue? What do the community members, neighborhood residents feel about this issue? So collecting all of that data is an important part of understanding the issue or the problem to be solved. Then from there, of course, we identify a set of solutions. We work through identifying which of those represent the best solution for our community at that particular time. And then we go into an adoption process, generally speaking. Most of these are going to involve some level of decision-making from the Planning Commission and the City Council. Each of these projects begins, as we talked about last time to a certain degree, each of these projects begins with a resolution from council appropriating funds to do these projects, generally from the CIP account. These projects break down into kind of larger and smaller, or medium-sized projects, I call them. The larger projects are the ones that extend for over a year, generally from a year to 2 years. Those are going to be generally characterized by a working group or steering committee of some sort that extends the entire length of the project. The medium-sized projects are going to rely more on focus groups or surveys or other forms of collecting input and data. All of these projects will have some form of community engagement plan with them. So that's kind of an overview of these projects. I don't know if there's an interest in me going through each of these individually and talking about them all. Yeah?
What's
A few nods.
the pleasure to go over each one? Is that, yes.
Sure. Okay.
We actually have a little time tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
And I think a lot of these will be familiar to all of you. So 10th and Page, Rose Hill, and the Preston Corridor overall. This was, not only was Rose Hill and Preston both identified as small area plans, with potential small area plan areas within the comprehensive plan, but as we've been talking about the new zoning ordinance and concerns around displacement, gentrification, and I think it entered into a pretty robust conversation on those topics, it was recognized that doing a small area plan for this area would give us an opportunity to dig into those issues around a specific neighborhood, dialogue with that neighborhood, and develop solutions not only for that neighborhood, but solutions that might then be applicable to other neighborhoods. So this small area plan rose to the top as an important one for us to address. We also recognize that that corridor and that neighborhood are both experiencing a lot of change, a lot of development pressure because they sit in a really desirable location within our community, sitting between the university and the downtown. I think we've learned a lot from previous small area plans that we can apply to this process. Generally, I refer to it as a community engaged planning process. I look to what we did with Cherry Avenue, Star Hill, and then of course on the comprehensive plan. And also I've looked to and talked with folks about the process that they engage with in Friendship Court around engaging residents in the planning and design of that project. And all of those are informing how we would approach a project in this neighborhood. Yeah.
A quick question. I know with
Yeah.
the Cherry Avenue Small Area Plan, I believe the city worked with the Planning District Commission as part of that process. Is that something that could potentially be of value to explore again to kind of expedite the timeline in which it may be completed?
I don't know that that expedites the timeline, right? Because a lot of that timeline is about community engagement. But what it does allow us to do, and I think it's going to be essential for us to do, is to have some sort of outside assistance, whether that's consultants or the Planning District Commission. We're going to need to be able to expand staff capacity and bring in outside expertise to help, as I said before, investigate the issues that we've identified and identify appropriate solutions. So yes, short answer is yes, but longer answer is maybe PDC, maybe other consultants, somebody who's going to have to help us get through that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think with Cherry Avenue, I think the Planning District Commission did a very good job of meaningful community engagement, including go to door, and produced a small area plan that is more actionable than maybe some of our other ones.
And I think that's really an important aspect of these, is we want them to be actionable. We want to come out of that planning process with a clear path of what are we going to do. And I'm really aiming for what are we really looking at in a 5-year time frame. It's not to say we wouldn't have other longer term things, but we really want to focus in and connect this planning process to an implementation program, implementation strategy. So we go into this planning process understanding how it's going to be implemented on the back end. Next project I identified was our environmental regulation and review. So
Critical slopes.
yes, and let me just say, so that was noted in a press
The
piece.
bane of my of my tenure.
I don't want to go into this with the assumption that critical slopes are something that we're seeking to get rid of, but
I'm not saying that either.
yeah, we got a lot of comments across the board early in the zoning ordinance rewrite process, right? So January 22, we were beginning that process, and we were hearing folks saying, get rid of critical slopes, or at least significantly modify it. We were hearing concerns about our stormwater management program and how that would relate to our goals for housing development in particular under this program. We were also hearing on the other side, can we beef up some of our environmental regulations? Can we incorporate some rules around green building design, for example? Lots of great ideas in there, and what we realized pretty quickly is that the level of work that we were going to need to do in order to fully investigate and understand those issues was outside of the scope of what we could accomplish during the rewrite of the zoning ordinance. So we suggested, and we actually came to council at that time, I think this was February, maybe early March of 22, I came and basically asked y'all's permission to set those issues aside and come back with a review and update to our environmental regulations. Same concept as the zoning ordinance. We want to review those regulations and look for how do we bring these into alignment with our adopted comprehensive plan. Anticipate that being a big project, though, with a lot of interest from various parties within the city. Yep.
Sorry, so
No.
is it known yet whether that's a process that would involve any of the climate team or the Resilient Together initiative, which is looking at climate resiliency region-wide? And in my mind, this is basically all about trying to be as proactive as we can for building resiliency.
Absolutely. And yeah, so as I noted, so this would fall in the category of a large project. It would have a standing working group that would work through the entirety would be engaged in this through the entirety of the project. And I'm envisioning a group that's composed of stakeholders within the community and key staff from, our Office of Sustainability, DPW, as well as, our partners out in the community. So this would be one where we would have a very robust dialogue, I would imagine, amongst those factors, yeah. All right, short-term rentals. This project that really came out of conversations we were having earlier this year where we perhaps erroneously suggested, what if we got rid of the idea of allowing short-term rentals in the zoning ordinance? I think we heard very clear sentiments around that issue. Really where I'm coming back to is looking into this issue to see what more could we do to mitigate the negative impacts of short-term rentals, particularly on neighborhoods, and address the administrative burden. As I think I noted in a presentation earlier this year, roughly half of our zoning enforcement activity is just short-term rentals. And that's just with the actual zoning violation notices we provide. It's about half of those. Doesn't even really take into account the amount of time that's spent investigating these. We need to find some ways in that body of rules and in how we do the enforcement to bring down that administrative cost.
I received another complaint this weekend. I'll get it to you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really one of those things that residents, when they see it, it's changing in neighborhoods, and so they know that the neighbor's long gone, and they see constant turnover. So, yeah.
Right, and the program we have is meant to be for something that residents are able to take advantage of, right? It's not meant to be a short-term rental as a primary use. And I think regulating that has its challenges, but that's the issue. And hopefully, if we're able to regulate that consistently and effectively, we go a long way towards addressing those concerns.
And it's true that Airbnb is not giving us the legally required list of properties and their revenues, right?
I'm going to defer to Todd Divers on that. I don't know. That kind of information comes into Todd. So.
Yeah, there's been some expression of their unwillingness to share some information. I don't know how far it goes and if that's still consistent, but I think more than likely he still has heartburn.
Yeah.
All right, the Star Hill Plan, which was adopted, I believe, in 2021, before my time, but one of the concerns at the time it was adopted was around issues of implementation and how that project would move forward. And so what I'm proposing here is a kind of a focused effort, talking to key stakeholders around that plan and developing a implementation strategy for that plan.
Can I interrupt you a second there? It seems to me that the Star Hill plan, or vision, I guess, as it was basically decided, has a somewhat unique situation in that we incorporated it into the comprehensive plan, even though we acknowledged that it wasn't really a plan. And part of my concern is that I don't know to what extent folks are going to end up revisiting some of the core ideas there, and I would not want to stifle their thinking in that respect, given that we didn't really adopt it as a plan. Sure. And so I hope that as we sort of sort through what that means, of course, we're all sort of sorting through what a small area plan is going to look like, and it may differ from one circumstance to the next, but this may be a very different situation.
It may be, and I very purposefully am trying to place that one after we've worked on 10th and Page, Rose Hill, Preston, because by the time we're into that process, we'll have defined what a small area plan is. It's one of the action items in the comprehensive plan. Define what these plans are, what their processes are. And so we can more clearly understand what are the gaps that we need to fill in order to complete the Star Hill plan. And I said in my initial sense is kind of a focused effort on an implementation plan. Maybe that changes as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Particularly recognizing that a central piece of that plan may not be possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, on-street parking policy. This was something that we had initially begun, well, we were aiming to have begun working on in the fall in preparation for the adoption of the new ordinance, but we weren't able to get there, and so now we're moving forward. You'll note that I've got this listed as April because we are close to being able to get that project started. That's basically looking at our existing on-street parking regulations and swapping those out with a new policy that's more reflective of where we are right now as a community, something that looks at how do we manage on-street parking as a community resource or as a neighborhood resource, and use our on-street parking rules and residential permits and those types of things as a tool for that management. Any questions on that?
Does that also include revisiting our permit parking fees?
Yes, it absolutely does.
Excellent.
Yeah, it has to. That's part of the toolkit of how we manage that resource is by the fees that we charge. And I think it's one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with is the fees right now are really quite low.
Yeah, for anyone who is following along, it's $25 a year, which is 7 cents a day.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I know that what I'm about to say applies to the rest of these as well, but it's so important that we're doing this work because we made all kinds of I won't say quite hand-waving, gestures during the comp plan, but we couldn't stop and figure all this out at the time. And we said, we promise.
Yep.
And so this is us making good on those promises. And so I really appreciate the diligence here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, the next one is this pre-approved building program. I'm gonna say this one is different from all the others in the sense that I see it as more a series of small projects as opposed to one big project. It's the notion there is that we would create a library of pre-approved building types that someone could come in, select out of that library and submit to us, basically just demonstrating that the building that they've selected fits within the lot, fits within the zoning rules, what have you, and then they would be able to get their permit. So the big thing that does is it reduces their review time and it reduces design costs. Also allows us, on the other hand, to promote design solutions that we want to see out in the community. The initial aspect of this is probably going to be focused more on accessory cottages and those types of uses. That's where there seems to be an interest in this type of thing, and that's particularly responding to the fact that the folks who might want to do an accessory cottage are the ones least in the position to do the design work, to understand kind of what, it's a small-scale development project. And if I'm a homeowner who's interested in doing one of these, I have probably the least resources available to me to accomplish that goal. I also want to note, I think this is somewhat of an innovative thing, but in our early conversations with folks looking to do small-scale infill development projects that are allowed under our new zoning ordinance, one of the things they've pointed to is the challenge of the stormwater management requirements. And it's not so much implementing those requirements that's the challenge, it's the design cost, the engineering cost of coming up with a solution that fits on a given property, and then again, that review process, because that review process can sometimes be quite extensive. And for a small scale project, that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So this has come up with a couple projects. One project in particular brought this forward as an issue that says, this is a project that fits right in with what we're trying to accomplish, but they have that obstacle. So we're looking to see, we're looking at this idea of a pre-approved stormwater management solution for small scale. I mean, small infill lot, residential development projects, that where basically there would be a detail of what you need to build, the scale of that, would be defined by your level of imperviousness, and you would just basically be able to type in your level of imperviousness, and it would spit out the size of the thing that you need to include on your property. We don't know that anyone else has done this, but we think it's an interesting solution to a problem that allows us to achieve the compliance we're looking for, while also making it easier for these small-scale projects to go forward.
I know, very neat. At least it's a few years ago at this point, our regional housing partnership had sent a group of people to Portland and produced a report about their ADU policy that included kind of pre-approved schematics. Is that something that would be useful to kind of link up with them on? Because I know they've just done a lot of research already.
Yeah, there's actually a growing number of model programs like that out there. Portland is, without question, the leader in the world of accessory dwelling units, backyard cottages. But there's a number of communities that have started to adopt these programs, from everything from backyard cottages all the way up to like 3 and 4 unit buildings. All right. Entrance corridor design guidelines. This is just recognizing that our guidelines as of now are out of date. They're out of date with the comprehensive plan. They're out of date with our new zoning ordinance. They need to be significantly updated. And this is important because we need, these guidelines are what project to a developer who's operating on one of these corridors what it is we're looking for. What'll be an acceptable design that's meant to streamline and make it easier to move through the process. And then the last one, in the 2.5 years.
One quick question. So
Yeah.
I understand that the BAR is currently updating their guidelines. I don't guess this is connected to this overall sort of linkage that the entrance corridor design guidelines is, but is that something you're tracking, I guess? Or
Yeah,
what?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, they come from different bodies of law. The BAR guidelines are historic preservation guidelines.
Okay.
ERB are related to historic preservation.
Okay.
But they're
Without the history.
What's that?
Without the history.
Yeah, thank you. They lead to history, as I understand it.
So do a lot of mistakes.
What's that?
So do a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. Any other questions on entrance corridors? And then noise ordinance, in my 2.5 years, I think it's been a steady drumbeat of complaints around the noise ordinance. Not frequently, but probably once every 2 to 3 months, one comes in. And the existing noise ordinance is not easily enforced. It's got some language in it that's kind of confusing as to how it applies. It applies in particular in residential districts, but not in commercial districts. But where they're close together, or particularly where you have a mixed-use district, it gets confused. And since we are moving in the direction of more mixed-use districts, mixed-use buildings, we need to resolve that issue.
Yeah, that ties into a complaint that I got from, I think it was a hotel, and the trash person comes and pick, which is understandable early in the morning, but it's loud beeps and they don't want to get up at 4:30
Yeah.
in the morning, and it wasn't a lot that we could do about it, but I can tell you I've been speaking to a lot of neighborhood groups, and 2 things they complain about is litter and noise from the university. It's assumption that it's university students on.
Yeah.
Do I take it there was a change in the law about noise from cars? There was something that came
Yes.
across.
Mufflers.
Yeah.
I think
Did they reduce the tightening
yeah.
requirements?
souping up the loudness. I mean, that's the only way I can refer to it. That's what I know. But I don't know.
soup up.
Yeah, to make it,
Yeah, I know this word.
Sorry. But I don't know where that is. I don't know where that stands. I know there were some changes to it that were either proposed or did not go through, but it could still be
Yeah, I know we had some folks back in January, it was like, sort of, felt like it was out of the blue. All of a sudden, they were inundating us with all this information about mufflers, and I was like, well,
Well, there was a statute that was passed a little over a year ago, I think it was, that one of the effects of it is that it allows, I believe, an officer to pull somebody over as a primary offense for having a muffler that is too loud. It, however, did not really provide any basis for measuring what is too loud.
okay,
And so while it seems to solve one problem, it perhaps aggravates another.
interesting.
I think that's the fix, part of the fix. There were other things, but that was one of the things.
That's what
Mr.
people
Mayor,
are
if I
writing
may.
to us about.
To Mr. Freese's point, the overarching issue, I think, on the noise ordinance is that the city's noise ordinance presents difficulties in enforcement. And if you have an ordinance that's very difficult to enforce, then that's frustrating for everyone. There are some other ordinances that, as part of this project, we would take a look at where there is an arguably easier enforcement mechanism, and I think that would likely be the thrust of the effort. Thank you.
That's quite a list.
That is quite a list.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's not all that our department does. I think it's worth noting that the staff that we rely on to manage these projects are also the staff that are doing development review, which has, over the last number of years, upticked considerably. And now we're working with a new ordinance that we're all kind of learning as we go. And so, there's a lot on our plates.
Yeah. I know there was some email traffic.
Yeah.
Excuse me, all choked up. There was some email traffic about the commercial uses in residential areas. And I know, again, that was something during the development of the zoning ordinance that we weren't all in agreement on. And I think one reason for me is just I feel like it needed more definition about what that would involve and, potential unintended consequences. I am sort of at a theoretical level supportive of the idea, but I'd like to see something more fleshed out before I could really, get behind it. So I know that's one thing, too, you all hope to do at some point, at least I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm happy to formally add it to this list of potential projects, acknowledging that all of these are.
I would suggest that, but I don't know what others think.
I would like to see that, but I also want to ask, how's your staff capacity for getting
Yes,
all of these done?
so that's exactly the issue. And so I've laid this out in I think what is a manageable kind of time frame. I'm trying to be cognizant of a couple things. On the one hand, we will be, over the course of this year, adding some staff into the department that will be directly working on planning, on these tasks, right? So we have capacity coming on board, theoretically, assuming we can fill the positions. On the other hand, we really don't know yet what the other workload is going to look like coming in on the development review side. So part of what I'm looking for from council as well is a sense of priorities as I move through the year and I have to make adjustments to our schedule and our work plan based on that capacity, where the highest priority items are versus those that can push out if they need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I believe it was the retreat, we brought this up again, or was it the meeting in February when we had to vote on the language? Either way, recently, and
Yeah.
we agreed, enough of us agreed that we wanted to see some progress made on figuring out the small-scale commercial adjustment sometime this summer, I believe was what we were talking about. Not like, fixing it by then, but bringing it up for a rediscussion and starting to figure that
We
out.
took the timing out of the sentiment because out of deference to Mr. Free's workload.
Yeah, I think we had given kind of like a range, like we had said
It's, yeah,
6 to
I mean, I would love it if
months-ish?
it could be done by then, but it doesn't, or even started, but I guess what I'm hearing you saying, Mr. Freeze, is you're needing some direction on the prioritization of this list, if we agree it's sort of in the right order, or if, as Councilor Oshrin is saying, maybe we insert this piece at a higher, earlier level.
I personally would like to see the entrance corridor design guidelines issue moved up in time, because we know we're going to have some proposals coming through. We've already approved them with apparently the caveat that we're going to fix the problems at the entrance corridor level. And I don't know how soon those are expected to be built, but I would hope we would get those guidelines in place sooner rather than later.
And as to the overall timeline, I'm generally good with it. I think the prioritization generally makes sense. I guess I can kind of live with it and understand it, because in terms of like the immediate impact on people, it's not the highest. But the only one that gives me a little bit of heartburn is also the entrance corridor design guidelines, just because it's one of those things, you can't really do it retroactively. And I think looking at other cities, not just in the US, but even in other countries, there are some relatively simple design guidelines that aren't prohibitive in any way towards development, that really can improve the experience of pedestrians and creating a sense of place, while also still allowing increased density and height. But I understand we can't do everything at once. The only other kind of thought question I have is, like, would there be a process, like, let's say there's the work groups established for on-street parking policy, and in the first month they identify kind of really low-hanging fruit that doesn't have a cost for implementation, or it's a very minor cost, relatively simple. Would there be a process for that to kind of be sped up and brought to us on an earlier timeline?
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, if we identify, what do we call that, low-hanging fruit, the easy wins, I think we move forward on those. I mean, I think about that more in the scale of like a small area plan. If, for example, we identify that we need additional signage in the neighborhood, like, we got a sign shop. Why don't we just do that? Why write it in the plan and wait till the plan's adopted to do it, right? We've heard that clearly. We can consult with our colleagues in DPW, and if it's all good to go, then we go.
Okay.
I like hearing that.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I support Michael's position. I think that what we found is that with big projects that will, once we establish a deadline, we'll get a rush of projects to either they like them or they don't. So if we could, that one could be kind of elevated, but I know that they all will take time and effort. So I'm fine with it, but I know that that one could create some angst as we are moving forward with these big projects.
I'd like to have just kind of a small little discussion about entrance corridors and what's this is gonna sound, I'm not trying to do a Seinfeld, but what's the big deal about entrance corridors? Why, other than the fact that they are how most people come and go from the city, which is why I think focusing more on the pedestrian and bicycle access is important rather than focusing on what the buildings look like. What is...
I can just provide my perspective.
Yeah.
I think our entrance corridors, how they're defined, for whatever reason, is extremely expansive and pretty much just covers most all of our mixed-use commercial corridors. So it really extends far beyond even just, those kind of main motor entryways. And I think it's also where we're going to see the largest developments in terms of our allowable height, density, which is fine. But I just look at other cities in the U.S. and again, even outside of the U.S., when you have that kind of larger development, I think there are some very basic design elements that may not even be that expensive or not cost prohibitive that can make a substantial difference in walking down West Main feels like different than walking in Stonefield in Albemarle. there are places that have a distinct sense of place. So I view it as a way where there's relatively low-hanging fruit that can just provide an improved sense of placemaking, which I think is part of good urbanism. So that's where I'm coming from, and I think it happens to be just incidental that our entrance corridors happen to overlay with where we're going to see those over time corridors develop of blocks of larger buildings, and I think small things can make a big difference in terms of the pedestrian experience for the city. So that's where I'm coming from.
Our ordinance specifically talks about, basically to make it a more pleasant tourist experience, for one thing. It specifically talks about protection of historic neighborhoods. Those are a couple of things that are, big deals for why the size of the buildings and the shape of the buildings and the look of the buildings become important. If we decide we don't care about those, then it's a different consideration.
And
We have to change the statute, but,
right, so
change the ordinance.
that's, I hope, not assuming that the current entrances to the city are alleged to be a pleasant tourist experience.
No, that's the whole point, is because they're not, that we don't want them to get worse and we want them to improve.
Okay, and on that note, I do, that the sense of place and the sense of place making is something that is done at a pedestrian person level, not at a car level, which is all about the road, not about the building. You can feel like a person in a place next to a tall building. But next to a big road is when you don't feel like a person in a place. So I don't want to, what I'm saying is I don't want that to limit our development.
Understood. And that's about what goes into the guidelines. The guidelines, well, I was going to say that the state enabling legislation that creates the ability to do entrance corridors basically speaks to them as being the pathways, the routes people take from outside of your community to historic districts primarily, is what because they are enabled as part of the larger section that allows us to do historic districts. And so our entrance corridors they're the major routes that take us downtown or to UVA, both of which are significant historic features. And what they allow us to do that we can't otherwise do is address aesthetic concerns that would speak to issues of placemaking, or think of them as kind of the gateways to the community or the first impressions of the community. And they aren't where they ought to be yet in many cases.
And I'll just finally say, I think within our community, I think it's unfortunate, and I understand exactly how it happened. I feel like the discussion has kind of reached a point where placemaking in architecture is viewed as being in competition with a loud increase in density and height, and I just truly believe that's a false binary, and there's a way we can do both that isn't prohibitive to development, and it'll just be positive overall. But
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me, if you're going back to the prioritization, the piece about commercial, all these other things seem like they rank higher than that, except for the noise ordinance. So I don't know that's really helping you much because that's a year out. But
So basically, you'd leave them as they were, insert commercial, and have noise at the bottom.
that was what Brian would say,
Right.
because all these other ones seem super important.
So for commercial, would the hope basically be we would revisit a decision about whether to allow those commercial uses by special use permit, but we're looking for some kind of additional information to inform our decision? Because my perspective, it seems like we just will have to reach a point where we'll come, because a lot of research and information already went into it as part of our comprehensive plan and zoning rewrite process. So
And we kept changing our minds, too.
yeah, but we have the information decision points. It's just,
Well, maybe then it's just a matter of someone representing those or helping me at least. I mean, I wasn't here for the comp plans.
right, which is, I totally understand.
And I would be interested in and I hear all that, and I'm definitely sort of with this in my heart, but with my head, I'm just still sort of not sure how this would look. I would be interested in other cities and what they've seen and what are pros and cons of what are unforeseen possibilities, I guess. What would a robust permit process look like? How would that be manageable? I mean, yeah.
And one of the things I feel like I heard was that there were not sufficient guardrails kind of identified clearly within the ordinance. We kind of went to a special use permit, but didn't necessarily do more to define what would be necessary in order to get that special use permit. So I kind of took away how we could identify and further explain what the guardrails would be on that use being allowed in residential districts.
And
Commercial uses being allowed in residential
yeah,
districts.
and to kind of similar thought line, but opposite side of the logic is what guardrails could we remove to make more things more accessible with, the reasonableness of expecting that some would need permits, but, who's mad about being able to walk to go get a coffee and a pastry?
So it could be
There are
nuanced.
some people who are very mad about it.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm having flashbacks. So I think that, it's definitely, we can have some discussion. I think we had a lot of discussion in the fall. I think ultimately we said, maybe a special use permit will allow us to have that overview. But I do recall we said we're going to look at it again, but we may end up with the same solution. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not wanting to prejudge it, and I hear Councilor Ostrin's point. I think it's a good one. Well, we can talk about all this later.
Yeah.
I would say that the other thing that I would like to see expedited is the issue of the short-term rental. Because that, if you want to sort of make a list of things we get the most emails about, that's right up there.
Well, I'm more thinking about it as if we're able to lighten your workload there, then all of this other stuff kind of can maybe happen at a brisker timeline or with less stress.
I like your strategic thinking. Thanks.
Get you out of triage there.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Other
Thank you.
All right,
comments?
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sam, anything else at this point?
No, that's it.
Okay. So, we don't have a closed session, so we're going to stand adjourned to 6:30. And for those who will be joining us virtually, there's a different link for that. So we stand adjourned until 6:30. Thank you.